On April 18th, 2016, Terry Bevers, Missy, as people knew her, headed to the Creekside Church of Christ in Midlothian, Texas, to instruct her Camp Gladiator fitness class. It was an early morning class beginning at 5 a.m., but she really wanted to get there early and set up. Now, usually these classes would be held outside, but because of the torrential rain, they were instead going to have this class inside of the church. Missy happened to have a key to the church to let herself in the event that something like this would happen. So the night before, Missy had sent a message to her class letting them know of this change. In the message on her Facebook page, she wrote, "If it's raining, we're still training. No excuses. You are gladiators." She showed up at the church around 4:15 in the morning, and by 5 a.m., she would be dead. 9 years later, there has still not been an arrest, and her family is still looking for closure. Welcome to the Beach House 34 True Crime and Paranormal Podcast. I'm your host, Christine Worth, and today we're covering a case that many of you have asked about. The case of Missy Bevers. Missy was a 45-year-old married mom of 3 daughters, ages 8, 13, and 15 at the time. She was extremely passionate about fitness, and one of her social profiles read, "Having an impact on others and helping others reach their fitness and health goals is my passion." She began her fitness journey in 2013, and by 2014, she had earned a personal trainer certification. She began working as a personal trainer at Anytime Fitness. In 2015, she was hired by Camp Gladiator to be one of their trainers, and after 5 weeks of training with them, began to hold her own classes. On Friday, April 15th, 3 days before the attack on Missy, her husband, Brandon, was scheduled for surgery. Now, this wasn't anything major. It was an outpatient surgery, but he had been dealing with some health issues since November the previous year. Missy didn't happen to be home at the time that Brandon was scheduled for surgery. She happened to be in Austin for a Camp Gladiator trip and training. Because Missy wasn't in town, Brandon's mom helped him the day of his surgery. But even though Missy was away, she still made sure to post something on Facebook that said, "Please say a prayer for Brandon Bevers this morning while he is having a minor surgery today. I hope you feel better soon, honey. Love you." I'm sure anyone listening to this can relate to how mentally taxing it is to have health issues and not have a firm answer as to what it is. Not only do you have to go about your workday and live your life as normally as possible, all with this health issue hanging over your head, you have your family, you have other obligations. It's very, very draining mentally and physically. This is the spot that Brandon found himself in. Now, every year, Brandon had gone on a fishing trip to the Chandelier Islands in Mississippi with friends, and the Sunday after his surgery, he had this same annual trip planned. It didn't matter that he had just had the surgery. He needed to take a break. He needed to get out of his own head and do something that he enjoyed. Now, Brandon was scheduled to leave on Sunday for his trip, and Missy wasn't scheduled to be back yet. But the Camp Gladiator training had been cut short because of this same torrential rain system that was in the area, and they couldn't do the things that they needed to do. So she arrived home in the early morning hours of Sunday, the 17th of April, 2016. Brandon was scheduled to leave around noon that same day for his trip. This annual trip that Brandon took usually consisted of a drive, but because he had just had surgery, he didn't want to have to sit in a car that long, and so he decided to fly instead. As soon as he arrived in Mississippi, he met up with his group of friends, and they loaded their fishing gear onto a boat, the same boat that they would take the following morning out to the islands. This trip would never happen for Brandon. Around 5 in the morning, he gets a phone call from a longtime friend who tells him that he has to get down there because there had been an accident or something was wrong. Now, Brandon, Missy, and their family, they lived in Red Oak, Texas, and this was north of the place where Missy was teaching her class at the Creekside Church. Brandon told his friend that he wasn't at home. He was away on this fishing trip, but this guy is insistent that he gets home as soon as possible. So Brandon, at this point, he doesn't know what to think and believes that Missy might have been in a car accident or something. He also thought that Missy's 70-year-old mom was around because she was supposed to come and stay the night on Sunday. She's only about 2 hours away. But because of this terrible weather pattern that they were having with the rain and the storms, she never showed up and didn't want to take a chance in the weather. At this point, though, Brandon has no idea that Missy's mom isn't at their house. He calls her, but he doesn't get an answer. He does, however, get a phone call from a Midlothian police officer, and she relayed to Brandon that Missy is no longer with us. Brandon then called Missy's brother, waking him up and asking him if he knew where Missy's mom was. He said that she was there with them. Brandon then told him that something had happened to Missy, and according to the officer, Missy was no longer with us. In the meantime, another family member heads to the Beaver household to wake up the girls. Brandon lets the guy who's in charge of this annual fishing trip know that something bad has happened back home, and he has to get back there. Brandon did go to the airport, but he couldn't get a flight out in such a short amount of time. So he and his friend decided to rent a car, and they drove this rental car all the way back to Texas. During this drive, Brandon's phone is ringing off the hook from media outlets who want to talk to him. He was upset because he didn't know what was happening back home. No one had told him any details yet. So far, all that he's been told is that something has happened. But didn't he wonder exactly what it was that had happened or where, and why the news media, of all people, was hounding him so bad? I'm sure that during this long drive that he was reaching out to friends and family to try to get the details. When he finally arrived at his house, it was 2 or 3 in the afternoon, and this is hours after Missy had been discovered. According to an interview he gave on the Waxahachie Sun live stream in 2024, lots of friends and family were at the house when he got there, but there were no police officers present. So what did happen to Missy? Well, as mentioned earlier, she was giving a fitness class at the Creekside Church of Christ in Midlothian, and this was supposed to start at 5 o'clock in the morning. She had to move the class inside because of the rain, and she had a key to the church in the event that something like this happened. She got there around 4:16 a.m. to begin setting up. She brought her vehicle up to near the doors so that she could unload her equipment and then take it into the church. Now, there are cameras located outside of the church, but either some of them were not working or they were working, but the Midlothian Police Department, the MPD, didn't make these public. Inside the church, however, they were working, and they happened to be motion-activated cameras, which meant that they only recorded whenever they detected movement. At 4:20 in the morning, Missy is seen on video inside of the church walking into the church building. Now, this was updated by the Midlothian PD on April 22nd of 2016. In a video later created in 2022 by Tom Webster, he mentions that in this same video, Missy turns her head as if she had heard a sound. Missy then continued to walk down the hallway until she was out of range of the camera. At 4:35 in the morning, the first camper arrives at the location. Now, later in the same 2022 video by Tom Webster, he mentions that this person was not able to get inside or had gone to the wrong door at the time. This person had wanted to get there early because it was their first time taking this class. At 5 o'clock in the morning, 2 911 calls come in from the church. Campers had found Missy and had dialed the police. She had been found in the church on the floor, bleeding with obvious injuries to her head, and torso. At 5:01 a.m., the fire department is dispatched. At 5:03 a.m., the initial patrol officers are then dispatched. The fire department arrives around 5:07 a.m., and the police arrive around 5:10. By 5:32, a chaplain is notified to come to the church. At 8:20 in the morning, the funeral home is on the scene. Now, I want to note that this particular time frame was based on research from Tom Webster, but I felt that this was odd. I mean, it was obviously a crime scene. There's no reason for a funeral home to show up because an autopsy would have to be performed. So I think in this case, he's mistaken about the funeral home. Either that or the funeral home was the one who transported her to the medical examiner. But I was curious about how they handled things in this area. And here's what I did learn about smaller jurisdictions in Texas. In many parts of Texas, especially these smaller towns or rural areas like Midlothian, the justice of the peace often acts in place of a coroner. They can legally declare someone deceased and then order an autopsy. In Missy's case, it was Justice of the Peace Bill Woody who was the one who declared her deceased, and then her body was later transported to the Dallas County Medical Examiner for an autopsy, which again may have been the funeral home who did this. So once Missy has been transported, law enforcement then begins the task of going over the scene. They had found broken glass and signs of a struggle between Missy and the suspect. By noon that same day, even before Brandon had showed up at home, the crime scene had been released by law enforcement. Now, some, myself included, believe that this was awfully quick, right? However, shortly after it was released, video footage was then released to the press of the suspect inside of the church. Now, you'd think this was a slam dunk, right? Here's the suspect on camera at the church at the same time as Missy. Well, the problem is the suspect was dressed in what appears to be police tactical gear. Police Chief Carl Smith said that it appeared as though it was a man wearing what looked like a tactical SWAT gear outfit. They had on a tactical helmet, shin guards, gloves, and a heavy vest with a shirt over it that said police on the back of it. The first sign of this suspect that the public sees from the media is at 3:58 in the morning when a camera picked up the suspect walking through the halls of the church. Now, if you'd like, I have this video in this same podcast on my Beach House 34 YouTube channel, where you can actually hear this whole podcast as well as see the video right along with it, as well as other images from the case. I'll have the link in the description for you if that's the direction you want to go. In case you can't watch it right now, here's what happens. We first see the suspect picked up on camera opening a door in the church and looking inside. They briefly walk inside of the room and then walk back out. They then move to a second door. And in their hand, you can see that they have a hammer and some kind of pry bar. Now, this door happens to be locked. And so they try it first with the hammer and then next take the pry bar and insert it into the door to try and get this door pried open, which doesn't work. They do take a brief moment to just stop and look around right outside of this door that they can't open. And here is where their stance sticks out to a lot of people. The way that they stand is what some people call a duck-footed stance, where both of the feet seem to be, or the toes seem to be pointed outwards as they simply just stand there, as if it is a very comfortable position for them. They then walk off camera and then are picked up by yet another camera where they continue to walk down the hallway. And this is another thing that stuck out to folks. It was the way that the person walked. The suspect's right foot seems to point outwards. So imagine for a moment that you're just walking normally down the street, and then you take your right foot and point the toes outwards as if you're moving your foot to near a 90-degree angle and then walk. This is exactly how this suspect walked. They would take a left step and then the right angled foot, a left step and then the right angled foot. They walked down to another set of doors, which seemed to be kind of double doors where the bottom opens first and then the top opens second. These are unlocked. They walk in, glance around, must not see anything they like, and then continue on down the hallway, where they then attempt to get into another door in the church. At this point, they turn back around and walk towards a recessed area where there must be additional doors that they're trying to get into. The next camera angle, they are walking out of a door. We just see the back of them and a little bit of what's in their hands. Walk across the hallway, and then they take a hammer and begin to obviously break some glass, because as they're hammering, you see glass pieces shatter all over the floor near their feet. And that is where the video ends. Now, while the cameras caught the hallway footage, there were not any cameras in the rooms, and so the attack itself wasn't caught on camera, at least that we're aware of. We do later learn that the suspect had used a pry bar to smash open glass in a window and unlock a side door of the church, and the church does not have an alarm system. So this suspect is covered in this gear, which makes it very, very hard to identify who this person is, much less if they're a man or a woman. The only distinctive things about this person is their height, which I will get to, and the way that they walk and the way that they stand. It's very distinctive. The police also describe this as someone being between 5'2" and 5'8" tall. Now, if you were like me, you thought, well, this isn't exactly the average height for a guy. Maybe it was a woman. But of course, I had to double check. So according to CDC data on adult heights by state, the average height of a male in Texas is 5'9", and a female in Texas averages around 5'4" tall. And I mentioned before how the suspect walked a little bit different with that right foot kind of pointed outwards. It also doesn't appear to me as if this is somebody younger, like, some kind of teenager breaking in to have fun, or even a person, say, in their 20s. The walk seems to be really natural to them, as if they have lived with it for some time. But it also appears as though they might be a bit older. It's just the way that they move. However, this walk and the way that they move could also be the gear that the person is wearing. If someone isn't used to wearing this kind of stuff, it may very well alter the way that they walk or the way that they move with the heavy boots and the knee pads. So let's talk a little bit more, just a little bit, about the way that this person walks, because this is a very, very big clue. According to my research, this walk could be due to a few things. And one of the most common causes is just from a habitual posture. And this is usually something that's based on repetitive daily habits. This is especially true for those who stand or walk a lot for work, like retail workers or law enforcement. Another common cause is flat feet, which can cause, evidently, this external rotation over time due to the arches in the feet collapsing. It could also be due to joint issues or arthritis, which is common in middle-aged and older adults, especially if you have knee or hip issues. And whether or not the suspect is male or female, it's so hard to tell. And that's what makes this so frustrating. It's hard to tell if this person under the gear is in fact male or female. The walk, although really distinctive, might be due to the gear that they have on, or, because it's something that's not natural to them. Now, when I first saw the video, I thought, people were always referring to he. So I'm immediately thinking, a guy. But as I watched this person walk, and especially the way that they hit this door with the hammer, the one that had the glass shatter, it didn't look to me as if it was somebody super aggressive, I guess. I guess I don't know how to put that, but it was more like they tried to like tap, tap, tap on the glass before the glass broke. It wasn't some, let's draw this thing back and like hit it with all of the force that we have. So then I thought this has to be a female. But in the video where they come across the doors, where it's kind of a split door, the bottom one opens first and then the top one opens second. After they open these doors, they go in and they walk back out. They just continue on down the hallway. Now, I don't want to sound sexist here by any means, but just out of habit, I can't speak for all women, obviously. I can just speak for what I do. It drives me crazy to have doors open that aren't shut. So immediately I would have shut the doors as a female. And sometimes males don't do this. Again, not trying to be judgmental. This is just something that I've noticed in my life. So, which kind of leads me to think, well, maybe it was a guy. But the problem is we just don't know. Throughout this video, you can also see the suspect carrying those tools. And one of them appears to be this pry bar that law enforcement believes was used to get into the church and then pry open the locked door or break the glass to get in. The other tool appears to be a hammer that has this white stripe along it. Now, evidently, tools were found at the scene, but it's unknown if the tools found were the same ones that were used in the attack of Missy. Law enforcement also indicated that this person appeared to enter the Creekside Church shortly after 3:50 in the morning, and this was just minutes before Missy herself arrived. When this story first ran after the crime, the Midlothian Assistant Police Chief, Kevin Johnson, said that they could no longer now say that they were looking specifically for a man as a suspect. And this was a day after the crime. He said, quote, "We are backing off our statement that the suspect on video was a man. I know we said he over and over again yesterday, and that was a mistake. There's a lot of speculation based on the gait and appearance that this person may be a woman. It's a legitimate question right now. We will no longer say the suspect is a man," Johnson said. "That does not mean I'm saying the suspect is a woman. It's just that at this point, we can't rule it out. We don't know yet," unquote. Now, later reports would say that Missy had suffered obvious trauma. And 2 days later, when a search warrant was released, it was revealed that Missy had died from a head wound inflicted by, quote, "an unknown instrument." It was learned that she had multiple puncture wounds on her head and her chest. The official statement was that the injuries that Missy sustained, quote, "were consistent with the tools that the suspect was carrying throughout the building." Now, a few times I've mentioned this Tom Webster video in 2022. He later stated in this YouTube video that there is a strong indication in official documents that Missy also had a gunshot wound. And if you have the time and want to do a deep dive, nope, scratch that. This would be a bottom of the ocean floor depths kind of dive into the case. Tom Webster has done a video which runs nearly 5 hours long and analyzes every feasible aspect of this case. There's a lot of speculation, as you might imagine. And after a while, my brain kind of started to hurt. But if you're curious, I would definitely check it out. I will have a link to his video in the description. By the time Tuesday, the 19th, so the day after Missy has been found, arrived, there were plenty of media outlets camped out on Brandon's front lawn. And after some time, he decided to grant the media just one interview. He just wanted to make a statement and didn't want to go through all of the questions and answers that he knew, or questions that he knew that the media would have for him. He stood outside his home wearing a black polo and a black baseball cap. And he said that he hadn't had a lot of time to deal with the situation emotionally yet because he's been dealing with the needs of his children. In this interview, he doesn't seem overly emotional, But, this doesn't mean a lot. No one deals with tragedy in the same way. It always surprises me when I hear someone say, well, they weren't crying. Newsflash, not everyone cries publicly. Everyone has their own way of mourning. This was also this first interview with Brandon was the first time that he heard a question from a member of the press that was something along the lines of if he was a suspect or not. And according to Brandon, he heard this question. He didn't give an answer to it, but instead said he was, quote, filtering it. This was the first hint that he said he had gotten that people would think that he had something to do with this. He didn't even think that this was a possibility because at the time, he was under the assumption that Missy had just walked in on a burglary in progress. In the meantime, Midlothian police know that they're going to need help. And so they reached out to the Mansfield Police Department because this department had more advanced tools than they had that would be helpful. And they also reached out to the FBI. So law enforcement is getting records from all these nearby cell towers. But, this could definitely yield hundreds of numbers, making going through all of them just nearly almost insurmountable. However, a warrant was released by the media that showed that they did, in fact, request this cell tower data. And law enforcement believes that Missy may have been texting or talking to the person who ultimately killed her. Or the suspect might have used their cell phone to check social media to find out just exactly when Missy would be teaching her class. Other warrants were also requested and shown, such as cell phone information from members of the Bevers family. That's one of the things that the police wanted, as well as others. It was during these investigations of the cell phones that law enforcement discovered that Missy and Brandon were having financial trouble and marriage trouble, and that there was evidence of an extramarital affair on Missy's part. They're also checking video footage from nearby businesses. And the thing is that in this area, the church isn't like in the middle of some metropolitan area. It's along Highway 287, and businesses along this area of Midlothian are pretty far apart. However, that being said, not too far down from the church and on the opposite side of the road was a business called SWFA Sporting Goods. Some called it the SWFA Gun Store. This business is now permanently closed, but at the time, it had various security cameras running all around the property. The police discover that at 1:58 in the morning, they see a silver 2010 to 2012 Nissan Altima enter the SWFA parking lot. And as soon as they turn into the lot, they shut off their headlights. It's raining pretty steadily, and the lights in the parking lot, in just the parking lot lights themselves, are picking up this vehicle coming in. Just like the suspect video, I have this video up on my Beach House 34 YouTube channel where you can watch this whole thing as well as hear this whole podcast if you would like to. Again, I'll have the link in the description for you. In case you can't watch it right now, this is what happens with this vehicle. The video runs about 8 minutes long. And what we first notice is that the car is coming from the direction of where the church would be on this Highway 287. And as it turns into the SWFA parking lot, it shuts off its lights. If it comes in and it drives to the right, and on the right of this store is another parking lot, and they're still driving with their lights off. They make their way kind of slowly through this parking lot, and then they move around. Again, their headlights are still off, and they continue on down the drive where they pause for a second and then continue on near the back of the store. At one point, their lights go on and then quickly shut off again. They then turn them back on and continue to drive around the back of the store, and then they come all the way back to the front where they started. and again are driving slowly. Their headlights are still on. They pause at the entrance as if they're trying to decide what to do, but then instead of leaving, they continue the same way that they had just come. So they go back around the right-hand side of the store. Their lights are still on, but at this point, they decide to pull into a parking space just underneath one of the parking lot lights. It's very hard. You cannot see inside. It's raining. There is a significant glare from the light on the windshield of this vehicle. And they sit here for about 3 minutes. We don't know what they're doing inside. We don't know. Maybe they're changing. We just simply don't know what they're doing for this amount of time. But the whole time they sit here, their lights are off. And then after this 3 minutes is up, their lights go back on. They then take a left to head towards the exit of the store back to Highway 287. Their lights are on. As they reach the exit, they wait for a passing semi. They turn on their turning signal to go right and then turn back onto Highway 287, moving the opposite direction of the church. Now, another camera did catch the backside of the vehicle. This has since been enhanced, and it does show, of course, where the license plate would be, but the glare is so significant from the rain and from the lights that you can't really read the numbers. But you can see what appears to be some kind of oval sticker on the bumper, but you can't tell what it is, if it's a picture, if it has words. You can't tell anything about this. Now, one of the cameras, there happened to be a camera either near or on the light that was in the parking lot of SWFA as they're leaving after this 3-minute pause. And while you can't see inside of the vehicle, or at least who's driving, you can see the driver's seat itself, because the driver's seat is actually light in color and it's reflecting off of the parking lot light. And it does appear to be set either pretty far back or laid back. So remember, the height of the suspect at the church was between 5'2" and 5'8", with the seat pushed back as far as it could be in the Altima. And from this year, between 2010 and 2012 Altimas, we can guesstimate that the height of the driver was around 5'8" to 6 feet tall. And this is only if it was leaning back or pushed halfway back. If it was pushed all the way back, the driver would have to have been 6'2" to 6'5". But the seat does appear more reclined than pushed back, and not all the way back as far as it could go. I want to make it very clear, though, no one even knows if this vehicle is related in any way to the crime scene at the church. Although the driving of this vehicle is suspicious, and it is close to the church where Missy was killed, and it showed up just a couple of hours before the crime at the church, it kind of leads you to think that, well, it might be, right? Either this was a case of really, really bad timing, or this person is somehow related. The police did go and search for this vehicle and asked whoever owned this vehicle to come forward. They just wanted to ask them some questions. But the vehicle was never located, nor did anyone ever come forward with information. Now, this video footage of this Altima, however, wasn't released to the public until around May of 2016. And this would have been, say, a couple of weeks or so after the crime itself. Media outlets continued to release information on search warrants that were put out by law enforcement. And they discovered that 4 days before Missy's death, she had received a quote-unquote creepy message on LinkedIn. Now, Missy was very active on LinkedIn. Less than 3 days before she was murdered, she had received this creepy message, and she showed it to a friend of hers. Later, this friend would tell law enforcement about it, but she couldn't remember the name that was attached to this creepy message. Evidently, it was from a guy who wasn't known to either one of them. But here's where it gets a little hazy. Law enforcement also discovered that Missy had had conversations with a man through LinkedIn, and these messages were called by law enforcement as, quote, ultimately turned flirtatious and familiar. Even though law enforcement had gathered Missy's cell phone and her iPad, it was discovered that these messages had been deleted. So she was trying to cover her tracks. That was obvious. But it led me to think that once they had discovered who this person was, that they'd be able to seize his cell phone records as well. Maybe he didn't delete his messages. Was this other person married or in a relationship? Did their significant other see these messages? Well, later, I'll have some answers to these. I'll go through all of the suspects in this case. But as you might imagine, Brandon was brought in for questioning. And of course, they always start with the people closest to the victim. On the day that he went to the police station for questioning, his dad went with him, where they both met with detectives in an interview room. And Brandon said that he was run through what he calls the typical questions, such as where he was, what he was doing, etc. I found it interesting that Brandon was questioned with his dad in the room with him. Not that this points suspicion at anyone, but it doesn't seem like your typical police procedure, right? In this interview, his dad asked law enforcement if they should get a lawyer. And immediately, Brandon said no. He wanted to give the police everything they needed just so they could get on with investigating this case. There was video released by the media of Brandon and his dad walking into the police station. And Brandon's dad seems to walk with this noticeable limp, a gait that seems out of the ordinary. So immediately, no surprise, right? The internet went nuts thinking, here's the guy, this is him, it's Brandon's dad, look at how he walks. Well, no, it was verified that his dad was in California during the time of the crime. But the way that his dad walked wasn't the only thing. Just a few days later, a dry cleaner had called the police because Brandon's dad had brought in a shirt that had blood on it. Seems highly suspicious, doesn't it? Until you actually learn the facts. It sounds good, blood on a shirt, a unique way of walking, my lord, it must be Brandon's dad. Turns out that he told the dry cleaner that it was animal blood. Now, investigators obtained a receipt from the dry cleaner that had described these stains on the shirt as animal blood red. So investigators immediately went and picked up this shirt. The explanation for this animal blood was that Brandon's parents had brought along their dog with them from San Diego after hearing about what had happened with Missy. They were staying with other family members who also had their own dog, and this dog attacked the parents' smaller dog. And they then took their dog to the Animal Emergency Hospital of Mansfield. Their dog, unfortunately, did not survive the attack. But the dog had been carried into the hospital and had been bleeding, which explains the blood on the shirt. It sounds like a made-up story, but it's not. It didn't take long for the blood to be tested, and as it turns out, it was in fact animal blood. So back to the interview at the police station. Brandon said that after this interview, he doesn't remember a lot, especially when he was at home. But he knew that his girls were being taken care of because Missy's mom was there to help. Even though Brandon knew that he didn't have anything to do with this crime, he still felt this sense of unease. And he said that he felt this for months. Law enforcement did check out the cell towers in Biloxi, Mississippi, near to where Brandon said that he was at the time of the crime. They also did this with his dad and checked to be sure that his phone was pinging in San Diego. The FBI polygraphed Brandon, evidently twice. And in this interview in 2024 with the Waxahachie Sun livestream, Brandon said that he felt the questions were stupid, that they were trying to break him. So after Brandon is no longer considered a suspect, Brandon's very careful to say the word cleared because he doesn't believe that anyone is actually cleared. It was discovered that in December of 2015, just a few months before Missy's death, her identity had been stolen. And Brandon at the time didn't even think about this at the time he was questioned. And when he was going through the items at the house, he found the documents and handed them over to law enforcement. However, this wasn't until December of 2016. As time went on, Brandon did continue to talk to the police as well as the press, saying, quote, "I still think whoever this person was knew my wife and had a motive. I think it was a woman. That's just an opinion. There's no reason why an individual would break into a church dressed in that type of clothing and stage a robbery, or what would appear to be a robbery, going through the building, breaking glass, and opening doors. If that person was really there to commit a robbery, why did they kill my wife and leave her wedding ring on her finger?" Unquote. That's a great point. Another person who has looked into this case is Tim Koval, and he stated that one room in the church was in fact pretty messed up, as if there were actually a robbery attempt. And this room was the office of the church, where someone may have been trying to locate the cash from the previous day. It was Sunday, the day before Missy was found, after all, and folks would have been to church and donated either checks or cash to the church. One thing Tim did mention is that if you were a killer waiting on Missy, why would you go around making noise in the church? Wouldn't you just sit and wait for her headlights to appear and then get ready for your attack? Well, not necessarily, especially if you wanted to make the scene look like a burglary gone bad. If you just sat around and waited, then it would be 100% obvious that Missy was in fact the target, right? One thing I considered as well was that maybe there were two people involved. The person in the Altima just down the street, turning their lights off and on in the SWFA parking lot and driving around. Maybe this person was acting as a lookout, signaling with their headlights to the person who was at the church to let them know when Missy arrived. Now, granted, they were quite a ways away, but at night, even with trees along the side of the road, you most certainly would have been able to pick up headlights. Missy and her family, as mentioned, lived in Red Oak, and she would have had to have driven south to Midlothian to get to the church. And the highway that she would have taken passes directly in front of the SWFA store. Another question is, why would someone do it this way, say with headlights, and not use cell phones to communicate? Well, cell phones can be traced, can't they? If this is someone who thought and planned this all out to get rid of Missy and make it look like a burglary, they may have been smart enough not to use their cell phones. Maybe turn them off or not even have them altogether, using headlights as kind of this old-fashioned way of signaling someone. Now, of course, this is all speculation. The truth is, after a year went by, there were still no arrests. And then another year, and then another, until we've arrived to today, and still nothing. However, this doesn't mean that there weren't or are not any people of interest. So, who were these people? If we go back to Tom Webster's 5-hour-long video, he does give a rundown of those who may be considered suspects. Of course, we know Brandon, her husband, Brandon's dad. Another idea was that maybe Brandon had hired a hitman. It was either the trainer that Missy was in contact with or his wife, maybe a participant in Missy's class itself, this guy who sent her the creepy message, a spouse of a man that Missy had had an affair with, a random burglar, or an actual police officer. So let's start with Brandon's dad. As I mentioned earlier, Brandon's dad seemed to generate a lot of interest, especially online, just simply because of how he walked, and some feel that the walk was similar to the person in the church. However, the Midlothian Police Department did confirm that he was in California the day that Missy was murdered. His phone pinged in California, and he has a Facebook post that says, "Landed in Oceanside for 2 weeks," and this was posted on April 11th. He does walk a certain way, but it does differ from the way that the suspect walked. So what about Brandon himself? He and Missy had marital problems. And if, and this is just speculation, if Brandon himself had been having an affair, this quote unquote other woman may have known that Brandon would be out of town and Missy would be by herself at the church for the class that day. This way, Brandon wouldn't be suspected. I mean, it makes for a good story, but I couldn't find anywhere that it was verified that Brandon himself was in fact having an affair. The day before Missy was murdered, Brandon had told his mother that he was worried about Missy's safety. So this could be either here or there, right? I mean, she is going somewhere in the early morning hours when there's little to no people around. It's feasible that he may be worried. One thing that Tom had brought up, and this has always been kind of curious to me, is that on March 7th, Brandon made a Facebook post about the Eagles co-founder, the band The Eagles co-founder, Randy Meisner's wife, who was found shot dead. In this post, this is what Brandon said. As odd as this sounds, I was lying in bed thinking about Randy Meisner last night. I have no idea why he came to mind. I was thinking about Take It to the Limit, name of a song, and other stuff. I was floored when I heard this story. At no other time has this guy come to mind for me until last night. Kind of strange. So was he saying he had a premonition of sorts? It has been revealed, at least through some of Tom's research and what he's read in police reports, that Missy was shot as well as bludgeoned to death. One question that Tom poses is this, quote, if Brandon never took action against Missy for her first time cheating, why would he the second or the third? Unquote. And I wanted to give an answer to that. My answer is this, is that I guess because the first time can be forgiven as a mistake, but when it keeps happening, it's now a choice. And this could have been what sent him over the top. And then this whole thing about a hitman just seems like a huge stretch. You could say, well, they were having financial issues. How could he pay for a hitman? True, but then again, an insurance payoff could help considerably. But beyond that, a hitman isn't going to take the chance of getting caught. They aren't going to stick around and do further damage to someone like bludgeoning her to death. However, as I researched this, I did learn that in rare cases where the violence on the person seems excessive or personal, it could happen. It's very unusual, but it could happen based on what the hiring person wanted done. If it were a professional hit, the primary goal would be a fast and low risk kill. The use of a hammer, like one of the tools that this person was carrying in the video, and blunt force trauma is not typical and far, far too time consuming. So in 2019, the Midlothian Police Department released an update on the case on their Facebook page. And here's what it said. Today is the 3-year anniversary of the homicide of Terry Missy Bevers. The murder occurred in the early morning hours on April 18, 2016, as she was preparing to lead a boot camp-style class at a church in Midlothian, Texas. The Midlothian Police Department continues to investigate all leads in this case. Midlothian police investigators, diligently working with professional outside resources, are determined to see this case reach closure. We continue to follow up on leads and tips as they are developed. We continue to benefit from a number of new, highly advanced investigative techniques. There has been substantial assumption about this case as it continues to receive nationwide attention. Please know that we will continue to thoughtfully protect the release of information about Missy's murder so long as this case remains open. To do otherwise would be irresponsible and simply poor police work. Sometimes members of our community have information of some value but do not come forward with the information because of concerns that it may not be important or deemed as a waste of time. It is our sincere belief that this murder will be solved through collaboration with the public. We believe that somebody who has not yet come forward may have that vital piece of information that to this date unknowingly is being withheld. We appeal to the members of the public. Please contact the Midlothian Police Department, regardless of how insignificant they may think their information may be. Some points we would like to clarify or reiterate. Investigators are actively working this case and are focusing time between reviewing the existing case file as well as investigating new leads. This includes assistance from multiple law enforcement agencies and forensics experts. Investigators have presented this case to multiple homicide investigators associations for review. No new substantial investigative work was generated due to these presentations. A firearm recovered from the scene was confirmed to have belonged to the victim. The firearm was not used during the crime and was located in the victim's vehicle. To date, investigators have received over 2,000 tips and are still receiving multiple tips weekly from across the country. These tips are largely based on persons who are perceived to have a similar walk or gait. Investigators are still interested in a vehicle captured on surveillance equipment in the parking lot of a nearby business in the early morning hours before the murder was committed. The vehicle appears consistent with a 2010 to 2012 Nissan Altima, 2010 to 2012 Infiniti G37 or similar vehicle. The vehicle of interest is driving slowly around the closed business. The driver turns the lights off and on multiple times and then parks for a short time before exiting the parking lot. The suspect observed on church surveillance equipment is wearing police-type gear. The authenticity of the gear is not known. Height analysis estimates the vertical distance from the floor to the top of the headwear of the suspect to be approximately 5'8", plus or minus about 1.5 inches. In the video surveillance, the suspect appears to have a unique walk or gait. The suspect's feet appear to turn outward away from the body, more predominantly on the right foot. Investigators are interested in persons who fall within or near this height range and have a similar walk or gait and may have had a similar walk or gait during the time of this offense. It is possible the walk or gait caused by a temporary condition, injury, or other factor, and the suspect will no longer exhibit this walk or gait. Now, another suspect that came under scrutiny was around late of 2019, and his first name was Bobby. Multiple tips were received by law enforcement about a dark SUV that was seen leaving the Creekside Church of Christ around the time of the crime. This person also has background as a former tactical police officer and attended the same church as Missy and her family. And in his vehicle, they found the following: a black pair of men's work boots, a pair of handcuffs in a leather holster, a hammer and a flathead screwdriver, another hammer, a pair of gloves, an ASP baton, another pair of black gloves, a black tactical belt, a black glove, a black tactical belt with a strap, a monocular, Bushnell binoculars, a black knee brace, 2 pairs of men's pants, a DVD camera in a box, legal documents, and these were all within a 2014 Honda CR-V with Texas plates. This man was later cleared. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know many people who drive around with handcuffs and a leather holster, an ASP baton, black tactical belts, etc., unless they're in law enforcement. This would make sense. He was, in fact, a former police officer and he's referred to as being a tactical gear enthusiast. He lived in the area near Midlothian, Texas, and was a member of a church where Missy had connections. And if you're like me, you thought, well, hell, this guy is just giving you everything you need. However, since he was 6'1" and the height didn't match the height of the suspect on surveillance footage, along with the fact that he had an alibi for the time of the murder, he was ruled out as a suspect. You might be interested to know, however, that he was arrested in June of 2017 on unrelated charges, which dealt with the possession of, let's just say, items related to children that no one should ever have in their possession. This isn't all about this guy, though. There's footage of him around 2016 just walking around. And the way that he walks, his gait, is very, very similar to the person in the video. Could they be wrong about the height of this person? And why was his vehicle seen leaving the parking lot around the time of the crime? Was it even his vehicle? Or was it another vehicle out there that has yet to be identified? So let's talk about the guy on LinkedIn. The man that Missy was having an affair with at the time of the crime is listed as 5'8", part of the U.S. Army Anti-Terrorist Task Force, and has MMA experience. Messages between he and Missy were romantic. And after Missy was killed, he posted a photo on Twitter on April 19th, the day after the crime. And although this doesn't sound strange, it was his first post that he had made since February of 2013. So why did he feel it was important to post something now at this juncture? Law enforcement did determine who he was, and they did look at his phone as well. He too was married. He was also a part of Camp Gladiator and was in a photo with Missy and another trainer while they were at the camp in Austin. His height seems to match, and it's unknown if he had a walk like the suspect seen in the videos, although there was some online speculation that he had a foot injury. I don't believe this was ever proven. What about his wife, though? Well, she too was looked at by Tom in that video, and her build just simply isn't the same as the suspect in the videos. So let's talk about another person, another confirmed affair. This was one that Brandon knew about. He mentioned it to police as soon as his name, which I will not state here, was released in a warrant. After this affidavit or after this warrant was released, this guy deleted his social media accounts, and he too was married. And 7 months after Missy was murdered, he filed for divorce. I don't know if his wife was ever looked at as a suspect, but when it comes to whether or not the suspect is a man or a woman, here's what Tom had to say in his 5-hour-long video, and I'm going to paraphrase here because I want to make a couple of comments. He mentions a couple of things. The first thing that he says is, where was her man at 1 to 5 a.m. on a Monday morning that he wouldn't notice that she was gone? And this one made me laugh. I mean, I don't know if you're out there laughing too, because I don't know about any of you listening to this, but I could get out of bed, go into an adjoining room, turn on the television, make coffee, not even bother being quiet about it, and my husband still wouldn't wake up. So yes, this is very possible. The next thing he says is, quote, how many women are going out in the rain at 1 a.m. and putting on a helmet and wearing police gear? If I was a woman and had to get revenge on another woman, I'd be like, nah, I'll do it next week, unquote. I had to shake my head at this one. Yeah, we're all so dainty and worried that it's raining outside, or heaven forbid we want to put on a helmet. We'll just put it off and schedule it for another day because heaven forbid we melt. My answer to this: who's going to do this? Any woman who's pissed off enough is not going to care if it's raining, if it's snowing, or if there is a tornado coming down the road directly in front of you. Has he never heard the phrase, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned? I mean, yikes. Another thought that he puts forward is that whoever committed this crime is likely single, because living with someone would make them aware of all the clothing that the killer had. Again, speaking as a female who's married, I could purchase a brand new outfit, and unless I specifically tell my husband that it's new or point it out, it's unlikely he's going to notice, unless it's something, really spectacular. Now, I realize an outfit isn't the same as police tactical gear, right? This would definitely stand out. How often do you think that your significant other is going through all of your things? Unless there's some kind of a control freak, it just doesn't happen. So order from Amazon, hide it, use it when you need to, get rid of it when you're done. Very, very possible. The last thing that he says is, quote, no one is driving far in that outfit, unquote. I disagree. Someone motivated enough will do just about anything to accomplish their goal. So is this a woman? Could she have secretly plotted and planned this murder of Missy over time so that she could gather the police costume, find a date where Missy would be alone, and then make the attack? 100% this could be the case. Obviously, the police, they don't have any hard evidence against anyone, at least not enough to arrest them, even now in 2025. As time went on, there obviously were still no arrests. Information became more and more scarce, and the family is still waiting for answers. But I had a few questions of my own, and one big one was this: what kind of person who lived in the Bible Belt would break into a church and then kill a woman there? It feels like a violation of all that is sacred. So, who would do this? Well, I did some research on this. This person may have been someone who lives an outwardly Christian life, even volunteering at the church, all while plotting something heinous. These people are often very skilled at camouflaging their outside, and they know how to blend in. If and when this person is ever caught, will the Midlothian area be shocked at who it is? Did the church have some kind of relevance to the crime itself? For instance, someone who thought that maybe Missy was betraying the commandments by committing adultery, and so they felt it was the right place to get rid of her. Just based on the footage of the suspect walking through the church, my personal opinion is that this was not something impulsive. I believe that the killer planned the timing, the disguise, and likely knew that Missy was holding her class indoors that day. Whoever this is, they're organized, they're calculating, and they're very comfortable. They're not worried about what's going to happen. Her whole attack feels personal. They knew her schedule, her habits. They may have been watching her closely before the crime happened, and may even have been from her social circle, either the fitness community, the church, or even people she knew personally. It could be that this person is local, but able to return to quote unquote normal after the crime, which wouldn't have set off any suspicion. They may still be living nearby, or at least have a connection to the location. They may be narcissistic or obsessive, and these traits are definitely noticed by others around them. In my opinion, and I know I'm not alone here, the way that she was killed speaks volumes. No one is murdered in this way without having some kind of emotional attachment to the victim, especially considering that her head had blunt force trauma. Anything about the face, anything always tends to show something that's very personal, a very personal reason for killing that person. I would also think that someone in the shape that Missy was in would have been capable of defending herself very well, unless someone had a gun or someone came up behind her and just automatically hit her from behind. Because that at that time of morning, Missy is not thinking that, oh, there's going to be somebody in this church along with me. She's going to think that the place is empty. In 2024, as I mentioned, Brandon did an interview with the Waxahachie Sun live stream. And he said in this interview that the MPD, the Midlothian Police Department, went to great lengths to find the Nissan or this vehicle that was driving around the SWFA parking lot the same night of the crime. They were able to round up about 100 cars that matched the description, and they put eyes on these cars, but they never did locate the exact vehicle. Additionally, Brandon said that he currently, as of 2024, sends an email to the Midlothian Police Department at least once a month, but receives no response. He does state, however, that the case is not cold. A question that was put to Brandon is, how does Brandon believe at this point that this was not a targeted attack? Now, Brandon has gone back and forth about this, whether it was targeted, it wasn't targeted. But at this point, he's saying he doesn't believe it was targeted, and he alludes to another scenario that he said he is not willing to share at the moment, but he also said that it's coming to a head. And I'm not sure what he means by this. This was back in 2024, and so far, nothing has really come of it yet in 2025, but we'll see. The moderator of the show said that when this happens, they'll have him back on. And he actually did 2 interviews with this gentleman, and I will have a link for those in the show's description. And that essentially is the case of Missy Bevers. Again, no one's been arrested. They are still looking for tips. And you know, somebody out there, somebody knows something. They just need to come forward. And you can do this by visiting the website at midlothian.tx.us. And Midlothian is spelled Midlothian. Again, midlothian.tx.us. They say that once you're there, go to the police page, go under the crime prevention programs, and there is an active link to the Crime Stoppers website, as well as contact information. You can call Crime Stoppers of Ellis County, which is 972-937-7297. You can also call the Midlothian Police Department at 972-775-7634. Or you can private message them on their Facebook page. And it's at Midlothian TXPD. And again, Midlothian TXPD. Somebody out there knows something. I really hope that the family is able to soon put this case to a rest. It has been far too long. I hope you enjoyed this episode, or at least found it really interesting. Next week will be another true crime episode, so look forward to that. I want to thank all of you so much for listening, and please know how appreciated you are. If you have a moment, check out my Patreon, where you get access to perks like ad-free videos and ones that are uncensored. If this isn't your thing, you don't want to spend any money, that's totally okay. You can still support the channel by just clicking the subscribe button, especially on YouTube. It doesn't cost anything, and it helps the channel grow to bring you more content. Thank you once again. That is all for now. We'll talk really soon. Bye for now.